Morning. Thank you, George. Hi, my name is Ann Katz. My pronouns are she, her. I'm director of Arts Wisconsin, soon to be called Create Wisconsin, with an expanded focus on creativity. And we are here today as part of Creative Wisconsin Month, which is going on through the entire month of April. We are presenting a series of events, sessions, trainings, conversations, including other such things in our list of exciting opportunities happening during the month. And it's a celebration of all things arts and cultural and creative. So thank you for being here with us. Just a few housekeeping things, which we all should know after more than 2 years of all of this. Please mute if you're not talking. If you want to ask Erica some questions when she's finished with her presentation, you can put them in the chat box anytime. You don't have to wait till the end, but if you put them in the chat, then we'll have them when we're ready to go with the questions. Can you also please put your names and name, email, organization in the chat box so we can capture that as well. This event is being presented in partnership with the Wisconsin Partners in Arts Education, which is a consortium of arts education organizations, including the Wisconsin School Music Association, which is on here, the Wisconsin Arts Board. Thank you, George, for hosting and recording this with the Zoom thing. Organizations like the Alliance of Wisconsin Theater Educators, the Wisconsin High School Forensics Association, Arts Education Association. So we have gathered together to present this wonderful presentation by Erica Halverson. So I think that's it. I'm not going to talk anymore because I'm going to introduce Erica Halverson. I'm thrilled that she's agreed to be part of Creative Wisconsin Month. She is the chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction in the School of Education at UW-Madison. She runs a very cool theater company called Whoopin' Soccer. She is all about the arts and education. And in fact, she's written a book called How the Arts Can Save Education. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I think that's all I need to say because she's going to tell you all about it. But Erica, thank you for being with us. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for the work you do. And thank you for talking with us today. So take it away.
Thank you, Anne and George and everyone else. Welcome, everyone. I love the idea that we have opportunities to gather under the banner of creativity and the arts. I am so appreciative that you all are giving up some of your time virtually, whether that is synchronously for the folks that are here or asynchronously for folks who might watch this later. As Anne said, I wrote a book. It is called How the Arts Can Save Education. I am thrilled that it represents a collection of what I think are the best ideas around how arts practices ought to change the way we think about good teaching and good learning and the design of learning environments. And I am anxious to partner with each and every one of you on how we can adopt those messages for your organization, your constituency, your educators, excuse me, to use these ideas productively in your context. So here's what I thought I would do. I'm gonna do a little bit of a reading from the book. I have some slides so that you don't get completely bored staring at my face as I do that. I'm hopefully gonna read about a half an hour. I've got a video in there, I got a couple of other things. As I'm reading, if anything delights you, occurs to you, challenges you, resonates with you, please feel free to note it in the chat. I find that that's a really nice way to start to gather ideas about how we can work together. If you have questions as I'm talking, please feel free to also put those in the chat, and then we can use that text that you all have generated for our discussion at the end of our time. So again, I'm going to do a little bit of reading. So if you want to turn your camera off, please feel free. If you want to leave your camera on because you're looking particularly good today, I totally get that. And feel free to leave your camera on that is also something I appreciate. So here we go. I want to do this. So I'm going to share a little from my book, How the Arts Can Save Education. It is the middle of March 2019. Spring break is looming on the horizon. And if you haven't ever been to Madison, Wisconsin, that horizon is gray, cold, and wet. It is hard to find joy when the temperature never gets quite high enough to take off your scarf, except in a public school building where the heat is so intense and dry that the liquid in your water bottle evaporates before you can drink it. But there is excitement coming from inside the auditorium at Imagination Elementary School. It is Whoopin' Soccer Show Day, which means every student is filing into the room to watch a group of professional artists from across the city perform stories written by third graders from their school. This is the 4th year that Whoopin' Soccer has been at Imagination, so older kids have already had their stories performed in past years, and some of the younger kids have seen past shows or have siblings who participated in the program. The Whoopin' Soccer actors are already on stage, warming up by playing the exact same games, Zip, Zap, Zop, 3 Things, that they played with kids when they were teaching artists in their classrooms. Kids cry out, "There's Andy," or "Hi, Janine." And there's even an unexpected hug between a 4th grader and a Whoopin' Soccer teaching artist from last year who was just there to watch the performance. Amanda, the director of this show, calls for attention from the stage with our signature, "Whoop it up." Nearly the whole room replies, "Sock it to me." They know the show is about to begin. The show represents the culmination of 6 weeks of artist in residence work in 3rd grade classrooms. Whoopin' Soccer has been bringing teaching artists into classrooms in Madison since 2015. Our mission is to get kids, all of the kids, to express themselves creatively and to see their stories, poems, arguments, and plays adapted and performed by professional artists. When we enter into a residency agreement with a school, we ensure that we can work with the whole grade, regardless of the kids' perceived ability status. As they say, in the best Pixar movie of all time, Ratatouille, anyone can cook. Once a week, a team of teaching artists leads 90 minutes of classroom activities designed to inspire and stretch kids to write, draw, perform, or dictate stories around a theme. In the first week, we introduce our own make-believe world, Whoopin' Soccer City, and we walk through the basic components of a fictional story. After that, we choose a particular inspiration for storytelling, writing stories from pictures, true stories, playwriting, and arguments designed to make a change. Each theme serves as the foundation for the skills and habits of mind we want our learners to develop. In the final week, we collect the stories kids write throughout the residency and share them so they can adapt and perform each other's works. Whoopin' Soccer, noun, something extraordinary of its kind. Calling our program Whoopin' Soccer and creating a special place known as Whoopin' Soccer City where the program happens is an intentional choice. It allows us to create a whole world that we can co-occupy during our residency time. Teaching artists, kids, and classroom teachers all become part of Whoopin' Soccer City as a way to acknowledge that we are doing something different than we typically do in school, but that all school people are welcome. Principals often visit Whoopin' Soccer City. They come to classrooms and adjudicate arguments about whether pets should be allowed in schools, a favorite debate during Make a Change Day. They make cameos in performances, usually as themselves, but sometimes dressed up as other characters. These are still school days, but they are Whoopin' Soccer days. Whoopin' Soccer City allows us to create a classroom space where all students can express themselves freely through writing and performance, as individuals and as collaborators. Throughout our time, we tell stories in a variety of formats. We play theater games and introduce the day's theme in a whole group. On playwriting day, for example, teaching artists solicit suggestions for characters and settings, and then improvise through a short dialogue with actions that pairs of kids can volunteer to reenact for their class. We also do a lot of story writing in small groups. Each classroom has enough teaching artists to keep the teacher-student ratio to around 8:1. This allows us to split the class among the teaching artists and work in small groups to create and then perform stories for the rest of the class. For example, on True Story Day, teaching artists tell the story of something that really happened and then help the students in their groups to create a performance of that story for everyone else. There is also a lot of time during the residency for kids to work alone or in pairs to tell their own stories. We encourage them to use whatever media of storytelling is most available to them: writing, drawing, cartooning, talking out loud for another person to transcribe. These are all mechanisms to allow kids to best express themselves. By third grade, we have found that many kids are worried about doing it right. Doing it right seems to include correct spelling and punctuation and the appropriate number of sentences or words. In Whoop'n'Soccer City, we empower kids to write in whatever way makes sense for them and for their ideas. Our standard line when it comes to these concerns is, "We're really good at reading spelling, so don't worry about us." It's not that we don't care about spelling. It's more that we don't want the right form to get in the way of expression, creativity, and joy. Whoop'n'Soccer teaching artists then team up with classroom teacher partners to use story writing as a pathway for moving their students toward mastering standard spelling and grammar practices. Whoop'n'Soccer kids also write in whatever language is most comfortable for them. In Madison, there are a fair number of third graders for whom writing in Spanish is much easier than writing in English. This works for us since the schools we typically work in have bilingual resource teachers in their classrooms, and we try to have at least one Spanish speaker on our teaching artist team. But there are also kids who speak and practice languages at home other than English and Spanish, and they are eager to try out their hybrid language practices. We've seen stories that have components of Mandarin, Arabic, Hmong, Russian. Most of these stories represent a mix of kids' current expertise in both their home language and academic English. Every residency we do, usually an entire grade of anywhere between 70 and 95 students, produces hundreds of stories. The Whoop'n'Soccer team collects their notebooks that we give kids to write their stories in, and we read everything. That's right, we sit around a giant table, always with snacks, and we go through every journal. Each kid gets feedback from two of us in the form of within story notes and a short letter at the front of their journal remarking on a particular memory from the residency that stood out to that teaching artist. We encourage kids to write everything down and tell them that they can fold over the pages that contain stories that they don't want anyone to read. Occasionally that happens and we respect their privacy. Though we don't see kids in this final week of work, we pay our teaching artists for their time, and we think of this feedback session as a critically important part of our model. The other thing that happens in this final week is that we start to identify which pieces from the residency's oeuvre we want to include in our totally original vaudeville-style sketch show that we premiere at that school for their authors, their peers, and the school community. Many of our teaching artists are also performers, musicians, actors, circus artists, MCs, dancers, and every residency culminates with a group of performers creating and sharing an hour-long show comprised entirely of kids' stories. The overall aesthetic for the show is what I refer to as a Charlie Brown Christmas. A tree that Charlie Brown buys might look sad, but it's real, and with a little love from the rest of the kids, it comes to life as the beautiful symbol of togetherness that it's meant to be. Just like Charlie Brown and his friends, our performances are simple and evocative, and everything the kids say is taken seriously. This Whoop'n'Soccer Company performance is where everything comes together. Each 60-minute show highlights about 20 student-authored stories told in short 1 to 4 minute bursts of pure creativity. We aim to include as many student writers in each show as possible, and before each piece, the writers are called out by name in front of the whole audience to recognize their contributions. Any one show is likely to contain Broadway belting, a Drake rap, a performance art piece told with no words, and a young banana who pretends to be sick so her mom doesn't make her go to school. If you're interested, I have some videos I could show you, but I'm going to show you one of my favorites to give you a sense of what this performance looks like. It is the Whoopin' Soccer classic, I Love Harrison Ford, and You Can't Tell Me No.
Harrison Ford is a good man. He's 74 and a good actor. Harrison Ford is a good man, and my dream is to marry him. Harrison Ford is a good man. He's 74 and a good actor. Harrison Ford is a good man, and my dream is to marry him. It makes me sad, and I feel bitterly pushed out of my dreams when my friends say I won't. I thought my friends like my dreams, but to look on the bright side, I will stick to my dreams. So no matter what people tell me, I will stick to my dreams. Harrison Ford is a good man. He's 74 and a good actor. Harrison Ford is a good man, and my dream is to marry him. So if you're one of those people who tells me I can't, oh, those non-encouraging people. So if you're one of those people, then that's your problem. Not mine. Harrison Ford is a good man. He's 74 and a good actor. Harrison Ford is a good man, and my dream is to marry him. The moral of the story, to conclude, stick to your dreams. Stick to your dreams. No matter what. No matter what. People tell you. I know.
Stick to your dreams, no matter what people tell you. A moral for the ages. The age of accountability in education is losing its momentum. Education is in a time of profound change. We are increasingly aware of how learning outside of school provides life-giving opportunities for our most vulnerable kids. The arts, dance, theater, music, the visual arts, and the digital and design arts offer us a way to reimagine what good learning and teaching are and how to design learning environments that work for all kids. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down schools and exposed ever-present inequities in education. And though it has been heart-wrenching for teachers, students, and families, the disruption has also offered us the opportunity to fundamentally rethink what education can be. Gloria Ladson-Billings has called for a hard reset on education and for us to fundamentally reconsider the kind of human beings we want to produce. In my book, I describe how the arts can save education by providing new models for learning that embrace the social, cultural, and historical assets that kids bring into the classroom. I also share how an arts-based approach to teaching focuses on risk-taking as the most important aspect of a successful classroom. I offer a framework that leverages how arts practitioners do their work to design learning experiences across all subject areas. Throughout, I use my own arts organization, Whoop and Soccer, as a model for how to reframe learning as acts of metacognitive representation, identity development, and collaboration, as well as lots and lots of joy. Before I go on, I want to make a few things clear. This is not a book about arts education. There are many fine books on how to teach the arts, both in and out of schools, and I encourage us to read them all. But what I'm offering is something more. I use arts practices to fundamentally rethink what learning outcomes we should value, how we should teach, and how to design learning environments and experiences that work for all kids. In my world, we are not teaching and learning the arts. The arts are teaching and learning. I use the terms arts education, arts practices, and art making throughout the book. And across all of these, I'm referring to the arts as a collective set of disciplines where people produce things. Those things can be physical artifacts, like clay pots or short films, or they can be ephemeral performances like a music concert or an improvised scene. Many of the examples I use are drawn from the performing arts because I have been performing my whole life. But this argument is inclusive of all forms where creative expression is involved. Okay, on with the show. I have some slides that I'm not going to read through, but I just want to summarize because I think some of the more theoretical pieces of the book are differently relevant to different communities that we might want to work with. And I just want to show you a little bit of what that is without sort of going into the details of that. So I have three big ideas about the ways that learning informs the arts. I think about cognitive science and the theories of what it means to know and learn things. I think about what's known as the new literacies, which is a way of understanding literacy as the representational tools that we consume and produce. So moving literacy beyond just reading and writing text. And I think about culturally sustaining pedagogies, meaning a focus on the assets that kids bring to the classroom as a foundation for how we build our learning environments. But I also flip that, and in the book, I like to call that the Missy Elliott circa 2002, putting that thing down, flipping it and reversing it, where I look at how arts practices can also change what counts as good learning in a classroom. So I think about how arts practices are fundamentally about creating representations, and that creating representations is actually the core outcome of all different disciplinary learning. Math is about creating representations. Historical argumentation is about creating representations. Science making is about creating representations. And what we know as teachers of the arts is how to get kids to effectively create representations. I talk about how art making centers identity and how identity ought to be an outcome of learning rather than a side track that teachers avoid when they think it takes us away from the central focus of disciplinary learning. And finally, I think about how collaboration ought not be a pathway to learning, but ought to be an outcome of learning in and of itself, and the ways in which, as art makers, we focus on collaborative practice as an outcome of our learning processes. It is week 2 of the Whoop and Soccer residency, and we are writing stories from pictures. I'm gathered on the floor with a group of 9 kids a piece of oversized sticky note paper between us, and we are looking at a picture cut out of a magazine. It is drawn in a cubist style and depicts a jazz trio. They are likely playing a standing bass, a piano, and a drum set, but the artistic style obscures exactly what instruments they are playing. We know it is jazz because the figures are wearing berets and sunglasses, and there are musical notes floating around their heads. We also know they are performers because the bottom quarter of the image features cubist versions of the backs of heads sitting in chairs, as if they are an audience watching the three musicians perform. I'm gonna go back because this is the illustration. In group stories, especially in early weeks, I should say, this is not the illustration that the kids were writing from. This is an illustration of a performance of the story, which will become clearer in a minute. In group stories, especially in early weeks, the teaching artist does the scribing while the kids provide the ideas. With a group of 8 or more, it is a good idea to both ask for volunteers and call on individual kids who may be less likely to jump into a group brainstorming process. Asks of individual kids can come in the form of specific questions. Cameron said there were 3 musicians. What do you want to name them? Or more general asks, like, how should we end this story? Sometimes when everyone wants to participate, I go to a round robin style of participation, where each kid gets a chance to share their idea for the story. The only rule of this process is that you cannot reject anyone's idea. You must build on what the person who spoke before you created. Here is what we wrote. 3 musicians had been playing jazz for 3 hours on their standing bass and 2 accordions, when an audience threw an apple at Jerry Curry and hit him in the head. He passed out and hit his head on the stage. The other 2, Bob and Giannis, were happy because they secretly wanted him out of the band. Jerry was old, selfish, grumpy, ugly, creepy, and a bad musician. Bob and Giannis did Fortnite dances on his body. First they clapped, then they booed, then they called the police. After the concert, they arrested everybody, except for Jerry. They just left him there. The writing flowed pretty well. As you can probably hear, I elicited some details, names of the musicians, for example, that likely came from a kid who hadn't yet participated. You can also probably tell that I allowed multiple kids to do some describing. Old, selfish, grumpy, ugly, creepy, and a bad musician is a yes and list if I ever heard one. Not incidentally, when we performed this story, the 2 people playing Bob and Giannis both referred to Jerry as old, selfish, grumpy, ugly, creepy, and a bad musician. Keeping this language intact during performance was essential. You can also hear that I was asking for an ending and got several. I'm pretty sure when the police arrested everyone, I asked, but what happened to Jerry? Their reply, they just left him there, is a pretty great answer to that question. When we got to the title of the story, we had a bit of a tussle. We had one strong vote for the man who passed out, which led someone else to say, the man who did not go to jail, with a late surge for the concert that ended early. Disagreement bubbled, sides were taken, and then I did what Shakespeare did. I offered 2 titles with an or between them to indicate that audiences could take from the story what they chose. Twelfth Night, or What You Will, is one of my favorite play titles of all time. I love the idea that we as audience members get to decide what to call the play. Thus was born The Man Who Passed Out Who Did Not Go to Jail, or The Concert That Ended 15 Minutes Early. The title itself became part of the experience. When we performed this story for the rest of the class, we made a big deal of the title, enunciating every word and splitting up the line between multiple kids. Asking our grown-up artists to legitimately learn to floss dance so that they can play Bob and Giannis in a performance of The Man Who Passed Out is one of the great joys of my life. There's nothing better than taking a kid's artistic choice seriously, really going for it, and watching their reaction when they see 2 old people repeatedly floss on stage. And in case you thought I was too highbrow in my humor, I asked our best pratfaller, a retired reading teacher in her 60s, to play Jerry. Her entire role in the sketch was to get hit by an apple carried in slow motion by one of the performers, fall over, and lay there until the end. When everyone had left the stage, she lifted her head up and asked, "Where did everybody go?" The most important component of a whoop and soccer performance is celebration. We aim to celebrate the creativity of our authors by recognizing and honoring their contributions to our collective art making. Every performance piece begins with a clear statement of the title and authors of the story. It is beyond joyful to announce a child's name and story, have them recognize that it is their story, and then hear thunderous applause and whoops from their peers and families. Often that joy is in the form of laughter. We are not above poop jokes. In fact, we love them. We are also not above falling down, walking into things, using the rule of three, or any of the other tropes of comedy that elicit laughs from the young and the young at heart. The dumb jokes are always the ones that bring the most joy. In The Goat on the Tree and the Poor Farmer, our farmer loses his goat, played by a silly human who makes great goat noises, but otherwise looks totally human. And he can't find her. She's right behind him, trapped in a fake tree. But when he looks everywhere except where she is hiding, the kids go nuts. They scream at our hapless farmer, laugh hysterically, and continuously point at Goat Woman until eventually he turns around. These 30 seconds spark a lot of joy. Now, I use the word joy and not hilarity because joy can also look like celebration. We celebrate individual accomplishments and contributions, especially when we know the writer is not often celebrated for their strengths in the classroom. Teaching artists get to know the kids over the course of our 6 weeks together, and so we often select stories from kids who shine in the whoop and soccer context, but may struggle in other parts of their school life. We also celebrate how difficult the world can be and how kids navigate those challenges. For example, we took a series of letters that a class wrote during our Make a Change week in spring 2019 and collected them into a single adaptation. Each of the stories was performed as a series of letters read by different whoop performers, equally celebrated and equally valued. I'll read you just 3 very short examples. Dear Michelle Obama, can you please run for president? Because the person in the White House is very rude and very mean and very racist. And we need a girl person in the White House. There has never been a girl person in the White House as a president. And so your husband has already been president, and it could be a family thing. So your kids could be a famous person, and they could be a person that is a president. So next election, please be a person to be elected, because you need to be a person in a famous place, and you would be a more famous person in the White House. So I hope you like my reason. So please run for president whenever you want. So please be president. Dear future vampire self, how is it like being a vampire? Do you have any werewolf friends? Dear Donald Trump, I don't like what you think about the wall because my grandpa was going to come visit me, but he can't. Can't see my grandpa and grandma. I see the news every day to see if you change. I also pray every day to see if you change, but you won't. I want to be the president so I can take down the wall. I know you might be mad if I take down the wall, but I want to see my family. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about how I think the arts can fundamentally change the way we understand good teaching. Gone is teaching to the test and ensuring that all students produce identical outcomes at exactly the same time. Instead, it is improvisation, a genre of performance across music, theater, and dance, where people spontaneously create their own material as they go, that forms the backbone of good teaching. Improv is, by definition, emergent and collaborative. And improv involves identity, as we collectively create new ideas through interaction. As a method, improv is aligned with the learning outcomes I've identified in the arts. Improv has 4 key features, which I adapt from Tina Fey. Oh, that's funny looking. Tina Fey and her 2011 memoir, Bossy Pants. Tina, I like to call her Tina so I can pretend that we are besties, identifies 4 rules of improv that help guide our understanding of good teaching. Number 1, always say yes. When we improvise with one another, it is crucial that we affirm what our partner gives us. Now, this does not mean we can't say the word no, but it means that we can't pretend as if the other person didn't offer us something. If I start a scene by saying, I have a hand growing out of my head, the only thing you can't say is, no, you don't. You might respond, that's terrifying, or how did it get there? Or, hey, high five. But you must acknowledge what I've said and incorporate it into your response. The same goes for good teaching. Taking a constructivist stance means acknowledging that learning starts from what students bring into the classroom as the foundation of any learning experience. Actually, say yes and. As teachers, we go beyond affirmation towards working with students to build new ideas from our existing ones. In this way, learning is a productive dialogue among the people and tools within the environment. The and reminds us that it is okay to lend our expertise to student problem solving. Make statements. When you know the answer to a question, or you have a specific direction you would like students to go in, it is okay to say so. Making statements looks like taking leadership in an interaction. Imagine listening to an improv jazz band when no musician steps forward to take a turn as a soloist. The piece stagnates, musicians get stuck, and audiences get bored. Knowing when to take the lead in a learning environment is a marker of effective teaching. My favorite of these rules, and the one that most resonates for me with transforming teaching practice, is this: turn mistakes into opportunities. It is a great way to engage students' prior knowledge in learning something new. If a concept is unfamiliar and intimidating, students are likely to resist engaging with it. However, acts of resistance are still acts, and we can turn those forms of not doing into ways of connecting with our own goals. A quick story. A few years ago, during a Whoop and Soccer residency, I was working with DeMonte, a 3rd grader who was an enthusiastic participant in group story writing and performance activities, but turned sullen as soon as everyone got the chance to do independent writing in their journals. Sullen presents in a lot of ways. Sometimes a kid will sit at their desk with their notebook closed and their head down. Passive resistance. This usually means that they are nervous about the act of writing, that the motor coordination required either slows them down or stops them completely. In these cases, offering to write while a kid talks through their story or starting the physical writing process for them can be enough to give permission to express ideas. DeMonte, however, was engaged in active resistance. Sitting on the floor, knees up, hunched over, pencil in hand, he was meticulously making a giant X on every page of his notebook, 1 page at a time. In improv speak, we might call this a mistake, since he was definitely not doing the task he was assigned. I knelt down, watched him for a minute. He looked up at me, not pausing in his X making, daring me to scold him for not doing what he was told, or to tell him that he was ruining his notebook. Devilishly clever, since he was technically writing, so if I tried to scold him, he could tell me he was doing what he was told. Instead, I said, hey, that's cool. Can I see that for a second? While I wasn't sure what I wanted to write, I knew that I wanted to use his active resistance somehow to validate the work he was doing as connected to the work that I was hoping he would do. I took one of the pages and I used the space in each of the 4 V's made by the shape of the letter X to write in the widest part. Something I am good at, something that is fun, something that is boring, something I am scared of. Handed the journal back to him and I said, I bet you can't fill in this X with words. Yes, I can, he said. Turned the paper around, read each of the prompts, and under each he wrote, nothing, 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 nothing. You're not scared of anything? I asked him incredulously. No. I'm scared of a ton of stuff, I said honestly. Not me, DeMonte said. Well, what are the things that you're not scared of? I asked him. Can you write them down? I want you to share with everyone all the stuff you're not scared of, and I don't think you'll remember it if you don't write it down. DeMonte flipped to one of the pages in his journal that didn't have a giant X scrawled across it and wrote this. I'm not scared of anything. I am not scared of clowns. I am not scared of spiders. I am not scared of Colin. This one is a joke. Colin is his best friend. I am not scared of anybody. I'm not scared of a jackhammer. I am not scared of a gun. DeMonte and I used his mistake as an opportunity to create something working together by building on each other's ideas. Also, my favorite thing about this page is that you see at the bottom, he also wrote, whoop it up, sock it to me. So we had some sort of buy-in together around what we could create. Seeing mistakes as opportunities is a teaching strategy that values failure as an integral, necessary part of learning. Unfortunately, in modern schooling discourse, we use failure to describe the state of not doing something right, of not learning. We apply the word to schools, to teachers, and of course, to students. The phrase failing schools is a pretty popular form of alarmist speak, used as clickbait to get folks riled up about the poor state of American teaching and learning. This discourse is especially destructive in a classroom environment because it constructs learning as binary. You're a good student or you aren't, you did well on the test or you didn't, rather than as a process of doing and becoming. By seeing mistakes as opportunities, teachers and students can ask of a learning process, what happened here? What did I mean to have happen? How do these two things line up? And how don't they? A quick coda to this story. We chose to perform I Am Not Scared in the show at DeMonte's school, and again for our end of the year extravaganza for the public. Putting DeMonte's piece into our professional performance is another form of turning an act of resistance into an opportunity for production and performance. The arts show us that teaching, learning, and design are bigger than any one teacher, curriculum, or test. Through scaffolding risk-taking, creating representations that focus on each other's identities, and building learning ecologies that include artists of all ages, we can imagine a future for education that is inclusive, culturally sustaining, rigorous, and just plain joyful. While I'm not trying to claim that whoop and soccer saved anyone's life, I did witness firsthand that kids like DeMonte and the writers of Dear Donald Trump and Dear Michelle Obama and even Dear Future Vampire Self had their lives changed for the better. They brought their own expertise into the process. They worked alongside their peers to make something collective, and their contributions were taken seriously by adults who earn their living as artists. These are the gifts that we as educators can give to make a school a place where kids want to spend their time and see possibilities for their own futures. It's also a roadmap for transforming education and beginning a new era where we reject test scores as measures of success and embrace kids' assets rather than focus on their deficits. I want to end with one final letter that was written on our Make a Change Day. Dear everyone in the world, we should have more fun at school. We can spend half the day learning and half the day playing. No math. And we should be able to cheat. We can bring our pets and our tablets to school, teachers only in certain rooms, more ice cream at lunch and hot chocolate in the winter. We have a right to have fun. Fun is in the needs. Fun can help kids learn better. Kids need fun to create their imagination. This story contains what is perhaps my favorite line from any story ever. It reminds us that fun and joy are not just extras that are nice to have if there's time at the end of the day. In fact, fun is a necessary condition for most of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How can you have your psychological or self-actualization needs met without fun? Fun is in the needs. Thanks. That is what I brought to share with you all today. And I'm anxious to hear your questions and comments and ideas for how we might work together.
Woohoo! Thank you, Erica.
It was a little more than 30 minutes. I apologize. I'm an academic.
right.
I can't help myself.
Okay, George, well, we'll start off with George's question. How can teachers turn failure into learning while responsible for large classrooms of kids with different abilities?
I think that's such a great question because it gets at the heart of this change that I think we're proposing, right? Which is to reframe the outcomes for learning, not as already existing fixed goals that kids either meet or don't, but as the intersection of what the kid is bringing and what the teacher has to share for co-creation. So you can imagine, for example, a set of math learning goals that are not measured by test performance, but are rather measured by the artifacts that kids create and co-create to represent their understanding of a particular problem space. So it's not about how many questions you get right on the test. It's about how are you creating and sharing the ideas embedded in those math concepts. And that's a sort of abstract answer to your question that gets negotiated with each teacher's learning goals for their students. Does that make sense? That's sort of was an abstract answer, but I think it has to be abstract at the level of how does any individual do this, and gets more specific when you turn to, well, what is the subject area? What is the teacher doing? What are the kids bringing? What is the goal? And how do those things come together around the creation of artifacts and representations? Tell a story about a non-arts teacher who has successfully adopted your ideas. Yes, I can. I can think of a lot of stories. I can give you an example of, so there are lots of examples of the ways that science teachers have reframed what science making looks like to incorporate arts practices as examples of science making. So in Indigenous communities, art science, or the understanding of doing science as doing art, is becoming really popularized and is making its way into progressive science classrooms, where young people produce, for example, braided sweetgrass as representations of their knowledge of local plant life, rather than having to, you can imagine the traditional exam, right? Circle the pictures that of plants that you would find in a local Wisconsin ecology, right? And you get the number of those right or wrong, and your quality as a science doer is measured by your capacity to circle these, right? As opposed to, we've gone out into our community, we've found where this sweetgrass is, how it grows. We've learned the braiding practice, which is a very, very old practice of how you maintain and share this natural material. And we've co-created something together. So that's one example. I can think of another example of, so here's another example. The creation of screen printed posters as representations of our understanding of various kinds of social movements, acknowledging that in Latin American history, screen printing was the mechanism has been for a long time, the mechanism for social resistance. and taking that practice and incorporating it as the mechanism for demonstrating understanding of what social protest and social movements are and look like. And I could think of probably many other examples, but hopefully those are sort of practical ways to think about how this could look in a non-arts-based classroom. Yeah, I agree. I think it would be really fun to think with science teachers. And we are in the process of hiring in my department several Native American and Indigenous scholars who think multidisciplinarily in that same way. And I wonder if they would be interested in thinking that intersection through with us also. And that would be a really fun collaborative process, I think. I think the other thing I'll mention that is maybe interesting or useful for this group is one of the features that I advocate for in the book is the creation of what are called learning ecologies, meaning rather than the classroom teacher closes their door, does their thing, and then maybe kids have another kind of arts-based experience, for example, because in the high school they're in band or they're in an art metals and glass class and that, but rather to advocate for opening up possibilities for collaborative practice among the various educators who bring these different areas of expertise into a learning environment. Now that's probably harder to imagine in a high school, but certainly in an elementary school or a middle school, there are opportunities for professional teaching artists or arts practitioners like the ones who work in your organizations to collaborate with classroom teachers to create learning experiences that have many of these features and don't require the classroom teacher to fundamentally transform their practice, right? But rather, the transformation required is opening up the space to be more inclusive of who counts as an educator and how they can work together. And that's something that Whoop and Soccer has allowed me to see and understand is how do we partner with classroom teachers to bring our expertise as teaching artists to their expertise as classroom teachers to co-create something that makes this space possible. You know, in the high schools, I have found a more project-based approach tends to be more effective because it is harder to create this kind of collaborative, multidisciplinary set of practices, but rather to ask of teachers that they think more creatively about what outcomes for learning in their class ought to be and look like, and how some of these arts-based methods allow students to get there. And I've seen, I mean, that is happening more and more, I think, in schools, right? That we don't only measure young people's learning worth by their ability to produce consistent outcomes on exams, but they are creating representations, sharing those representations, using those representations thoughtfully as mechanisms to express what they know and to guide their sort of future direction as learners. You know, ironically, I think COVID forced the issue a little bit because you couldn't give some of those standardized metrics as effectively when every kid was in their own home, you know, doing their own thing. And you had to get a little creative about, well, how am I going to know, you know, that kids are making progress along these outcomes? My own child took geometry last year, totally virtually. And her teacher was incredibly creative in giving them tools for creating representations of geometric ideas that did not rely on, you know, multiple choice tests as measures of what she knew, because you couldn't give multiple choice tests. online because, you know, how could you ensure all of the things that you would want to ensure in order to, you know, make the test show what kids know. So I've seen, I think COVID forced some creativity, and I think we as artists and arts educators could try to pick up the mantle a little bit and extend classroom teachers' knowledge and expertise in productive ways. Yeah, Brian, $1 million question. We were just talking about this before everybody started. The question is, how can arts organizations best support local educators, especially in a time when field trips to see performances, et cetera, is a challenge? So, you know, I think, and I don't know what you all think about this, but I think the push-in model is long-term more effective. So not that we should give up the idea of bringing groups of kids to our spaces, because I think professional art making spaces are a really important part of the learning ecology. But I also think developing partnerships with schools where teaching artists and arts educators go into the schools to collaborate with classroom teachers, it is long-term the most promising collaborative model. You know, something else that I have been advocating for in my sort of wearing my more, I hate to say policy hat because I'm really terrible at policy, but what I mean is speaking to people who aren't doing the work, but speaking to people who structure and fund the work, is starting to develop a way to talk about teaching artists and arts educators as professionals, and as a form of professional practice that needs to be funded, supported through professional development, and treated as a career and a career trajectory that isn't hobbyist, which I think is how teaching artists and arts educators have been treated in the past is, oh, these are people who, you know, are either can't make it as professionals or think it's cute to work with kids, but that those old outdated notions of what it means to be an arts educator are harming our capacity and our potential for change. That was a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's related. I think you're muted, Anne. 2 years in, I did the same thing. I know.
Any other questions? We have 1 minute. Erica, is there a way that people can send you questions?
So my email is in the chat. Not only are you welcome to send me questions, but if you have ideas for how I can help you and your organization think about some of these practices and ideas, or collaborate, or, you know, think about your own professional development, that's kind of my gig. So I am super happy to have those conversations with you.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
I'm writing this down. The presentation is recorded. We will all share it widely, and people can get in touch with you afterwards, but thank you.
That would be great.
Thank you. We appreciate all this work and for making it so entertaining. And now that Harrison Ford song is in my head.
Good luck. Good luck getting that out of your head.
Exactly.
We just did a new performance and created a new show where our song was a song about how people wanted to take Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's head and make chicken nuggets shaped like his face. And so the phrase "chicken nugget shaped like your face," chicken nugget shaped like your face, has been stuck in my head for weeks, similar to Harrison Ford. So now there's another earworm that you are welcome to take with you. Chicken nuggets shaped like your face.
We appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
That note, literally, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you all of for being in the session, and we'll spread the word, we'll spread the recording around so that you can share it with other people as well and get the
Wonderful.
nuggets of it afterwards.
Wonderful.
So, thank you
Thank
all.
you. Thanks,
Take
friends.
care.
Take care.